Okay, hello. It is 2 o'clock. Welcome to the third quarter regulatory roundup from Dakota Software. Leading today's presentation is Jennifer Mester, one of Dakota's in-house regulatory analysts. I'm Bob Kimball, the Director of Marketing at Dakota Software. Thank you all for coming. This is our third regulatory roundup webinar, part of a quarterly series we launched this year to help bring clarity to the current regulatory landscape. We really value everyone's time and we thank you for joining us. Jennifer is going to try to provide a really high-level overview of some of the key regulatory developments from the third quarter in just 15 minutes. So that's definitely a challenge. We're going to do the best we can to keep it short for you. After that, I'm going to share a little bit of information about how organizations use Dakota's tools to help manage regulatory changes and compliance activities. Before we begin, just a couple of real quick housekeeping notes. While everyone is currently muted, we do welcome your
Mhm.
questions. You can submit them anytime you'd like through the Q&A widget, and we will address as many of them as we can at the conclusion. We're going to conduct a short poll about halfway through, otherwise, I think that is it. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jennifer. Thanks.
Thank you, Bob. Hello, everybody. As Bob said, I am Jennifer. I'm a regulatory analyst here with Dakota's regulatory team. I've been with Dakota for just over 2 years now, but I've actually worked in EH&S for nearly 20 years. Prior to Dakota, I led the environmental department for a large municipal public utility. I also have experience in EH&S management, environmental consulting. Our regulatory team here includes other scientists, environmental attorneys, and EHS professionals like me. We all have varied backgrounds and unique experience. So we research new and proposed EH&S regulations every day. We analyze the regulations and we create applicability and checklist questions and summary information. We help users understand if a regulation is applicable to their operations and what their requirements are. So before we get going, we just want to acknowledge that talking about federal regulations, especially during an administration transition, has a political undertone. We also want to stress that Dakota does not take a political stance. Dakota is on the side of industry. We're not for or against any specific regulation and takes a neutral stance. We alert users to all changes in regulations. So that can be when new requirements are added, if existing requirements are removed, or any other changes are made. So since we're focusing on current regulatory trends, I wanted to start with some information on the federal government shutdown that's ongoing. When you think about a government shutdown, you may be thinking about impacts to agency operations and staffing, and you may be wondering, what does that actually have to do with regulations? So government shutdowns also impact the regulatory process. So on September 30th, 2025, that was essentially the day before the government funding lapsed, the Office of the Federal Register published a notice of special procedures. So the notice explained what the office's procedures will be for publishing in the Federal Register during the shutdown. So essentially what that means is there is still publishing during the shutdown, but it is limited to very specific documents. So it can be directly related to the performance of governmental functions in unfunded agencies necessary to address imminent threats to the safety of human life, protection of property, and to provide for other emergency services. In addition, they may publish documents related to funded programs, but only if delaying the publication until the end of the shutdown would prevent or significantly damage the execution of funded functions at the agency. So the office is prohibited by law from publishing any other agency documents unless that document happened to be received and scheduled for publication before the shutdown began. And the office itself does not make any case-by-case determinations as to whether certain documents are related to those allowed activities. That responsibility falls to the agencies submitting the document. They must provide justification and certify that the document is authorized. So you will see up on the screen the information for that Federal Register notice. If you're interested in more information, it was actually pretty lengthy. It had a lot of great information in it. So much like the first and second quarters of this year, deregulation continues to be kind of the main federal government trend. This is being driven by executive orders and associated agency efforts to roll back regulations and push out the compliance dates of existing regulatory requirements. Agencies also continue to use enforcement discretion to manage where their regulatory efforts will be targeted. And the goal behind all of this is to align agencies' priorities with the current federal administration's priorities. So in Q3, we actually saw one pretty notable update, and that is the proposed rollback of greenhouse gas reporting requirements. The EPA explained that these changes are intended to align with the executive order Unleashing Prosperity Through Deregulation, which directs agencies to reduce unnecessary burdens. In addition, this seems to very much align with the March 2025 agency priorities set out by EPA Administrator Zeldin, where he stated that the agency intended to target regulations associated with greenhouse gases. So what happens if this is finalized? So on September 16th, 2025, the EPA published a proposed rule that would eliminate greenhouse gas reporting obligations for nearly all categories. This means removal of most reporting requirements. So greenhouse gas reporting requirements would be removed for all categories except for those covered under Subpart W, which are petroleum and natural gas systems. But within Subpart W, you're also seeing a reduction in reporting requirements. The natural gas distribution segment would be removed entirely, and reporting for other segments would be postponed until 2034. And the deadline for submitting 2025 reporting year data would shift from March 31st, 2026 to June 10th, 2026. So this is kind of a big thing. There's a lot of things going on with this. In this webinar, in this quick hit high level format, I'm not going to go into any more detail, but I want to share with you a way you can get some more information here. So Dakota recently published a blog with a lot of great information on this proposed rollback. We're going to share that link with you following the webinar. This is our latest blog post. So if you go to Dakota's website and search blogs, you can find it there. In addition to covering the proposed reporting rollback in more detail, the article is also going to have information relating to background information for the greenhouse gas reporting program, information on some significant legal actions that the EPA is relying on for the proposed rollback. This includes the Supreme Court's LAPA ruling and EPA's July 2025 proposal to reverse the endangerment finding. We also have some information on arguments for and against the regulation rollback and the potential impacts on the economy, on industries, and on EHS compliance. So if this greenhouse gas reporting program is something that impacts your facility, I highly recommend checking out the article. You can find a lot of great, more detailed information there. So another tool that the federal administration has used in Q3 to impact the regulatory landscape is the presidential proclamation. So first, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background information on what presidential proclamations typically are. The President of the United States communicates information on holidays, commemorations, special observances, trade, and policy through proclamations. Proclamations can carry the force of law when they're based on powers granted to the president by the Constitution or a statute. And we've talked a lot about executive orders in our previous webinars, so I just want to cover how that differs from a proclamation. An executive order is used to direct and govern federal government agencies and their activities. Proclamations generally are used for announcements of policy or ceremonial matters that require public notice. So why are we talking about this? On July 17, 2025, there were 4 presidential proclamations that were issued granting certain facilities relief from regulatory requirements. This is an example of presidential powers being used to eliminate the regulatory burden of regulations that actually still exist. The proclamations generally provide specific facilities relief from specific national emission standards for hazardous air pollutants, those are the NESHAPs, that were all promulgated in 2024. So I'm going to give you just a brief summary of each of these proclamations. You're going to see the proclamation numbers up on the slide. If one of these is of specific interest to you or something that may be related to the area that you operate in, you can feel free to grab that number and actually pull up the Federal Register notice and get some more information. But this will just be some real high level information. So the first one was the American Chemical Manufacturing Security. This impacted the NESHAP for significant organic chemical manufacturing industry and group 1 and 2 polymers and resins. That update was made May 16th, 2024. And this grants a 2-year exemption from the hazardous organic NESHAP, the HAN rule, for certain chemical manufacturing facilities that are listed in the proclamation's annex. The American Energy Proclamation impacted the NESHAP for coal and oil-fired electric utility steam generating units. That was updated May 7th, 2024, and this provides a 2-year exemption from the mercury and air toxic standards for certain coal and oil-fired power plants listed in the proclamation's annex. The American Iron Ore Processing Security Proclamation impacted the NESHAP for taconite iron ore processing. That was from March 6, 2024. This exempts certain iron ore processing facilities listed in the proclamation's annex from compliance with the taconite rule for 2 years. And lastly, we had the American Sterile Medical Equipment Security Proclamation. This was the NESHAP for ethylene oxide emission standards for sterilization facilities, updated April 5th, 2024. And this grants a 2-year exemption from the ethylene oxide rule to certain sterilization facilities listed in the proclamation's annex. So these specific proclamations are unlikely to impact you unless your facility happens to be one of these listed facilities in the document. However, the point I wanted to make by highlighting these is that this is an interesting action at the federal level, and it's impacting regulatory compliance in an atypical way by allowing certain facilities exemptions from complying with rules that still exist. And this may pave the way for additional actions to be taken, and we might be seeing a new trend in regulatory compliance emerging. So, in addition to tracking Federal Register updates, we here at Dakota are continuing to track the progress of congressional disapprovals through congress.gov. And we've talked about congressional disapprovals in both of our first 2 webinars, especially in the quarter 2 webinar. And what I want to point out is that there have been no changes right now to the rules that are in the congressional disapproval process from the updates that I gave in the second quarter. So there are 12 regulations that we continue to track through the congressional disapproval process. As I mentioned, I did go into a lot of detail on these in our quarter 2 webinar. I'm not going to do that again because nothing has changed. If you want to see more detail on that, please look back at that quarter 2 webinar. But we wanted to talk about this and mention it because we do expect that at some point these will continue moving through the congressional disapproval process. You will see additional regulations on this list that move from being filed, the ones that are highlighted here in yellow. They'll move to orange, which means no longer in effect after being signed by the president. And then we'll see more moving towards red, which is the final step, where these regulations are actually removed from the CFR. We've also previously discussed the 10 out, 1 in executive order. That was from January 2025, which ordered agencies to remove at least 10 existing rules, regulations, or guidance documents every time they promulgate a new regulation or guidance. So why are we still talking about this? This executive order continues to drive regulatory action, and it's a basis for a lot of the updates that are coming through the Federal Register even now. In our quarter 2 webinar, we talked about the massive day of deregulation on July 1st, 2025. The July 1st Federal Register included, among other updates, 88 updates from OSHA, Mine Safety and Health Administration, and Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, many of which included either regulation repeals or the removal of certain requirements. Many of these individual regulations were small updates that could have been combined into fewer, more significant rule updates. So on this slide, you're going to see a list of one group of these updates from July 1st, just to show you an example of what this deregulation initiative actually looks like in regulations. So OSHA proposed revisions to various chemical-specific respirator requirements. This was published as 16 separate regulations instead of one comprehensive regulation. And there was a little bit of difference between each specific regulation, but ultimately, the revisions allow additional flexibility and compliance without reducing worker protections, and in some cases also improve the overall clarity of the regulation. On this slide, you see a list of the updates listed by the chemicals that they're applicable to and the Federal Register number. If there's something on here that interests you, feel free to grab that Federal Register number and you'll be able to pull up more information on what that specific thing is. So we have talked about state-specific regulations in our previous webinars and how state regulations must be at least as stringent as the corresponding federal regulation. Some state regulation changes require approval from the associated federal agency. Most significantly, these are associated with EPA programs simply because many state-specific regulations are associated with EPA programs. Some examples of these can include state implementation plans, including any updates, non-attainment area changes for national ambient air quality standards, and certain state-specific programs, such as underground injection wells and underground storage tanks. In many cases, states are receiving enforcement responsibility for a program from the federal EPA, which is why this approval is required. So we're talking about EPA here because as I go into my next slide, you're going to see that there's been some movement on this, but outside of EPA, there are other programs where federal agency approval is needed. And this can include OSHA state plans and state programs associated with mining or offshore activities. So looking specifically at the EPA, EPA Minister Zeldin called out a massive backlog of state implementation plans in his March 2025 speech that laid out the 2025 EPA goals. Beginning in Q3, there has been a significant increase in state-related updates in the Federal Register. I say we've seen probably hundreds of these that have come through in the past few months. It appears that beginning in Q3, EPA has been prioritizing getting the identified backlog addressed. Once the backlog's addressed, we would expect that EPA will continue to process state-related updates and approvals quicker, continuing to move new regulations through the system. And that aligns with something that Administrator Zeldin had called out, that he wanted the EPA to not sit on these for years and to allow them to move forward quicker. So how does this impact the regulated community? Delays in federal approval can obviously delay state-level program implementation, although in some cases, state-level regulations can still become effective before the federal agency has approved a state program. As more approvals move through the system, it's going to be important for companies to be aware of state-level requirements that will impact their operations, specifically for companies that are operating across multiple states. I think in a lot of cases, we've gotten very used to seeing federal approvals sit there in limbo for several years, and it appears that that backlog is both being cleared up and going forward, we may see a much quicker moving system of state regulations that then are approved by the federal agency. So for Q4, we don't really expect any changes from the current regulatory climate. There's no reason to believe that anything is going to change from what we have been seeing. We expect more of the same that we have been monitoring since the beginning of the year. The one thing is that when the federal government reopens, we do expect the Federal Register to be busy. We are seeing a few things trickle in through the Federal Register right now, but mostly it's pretty quiet. And after a shutdown, agencies will need to catch up and generally will issue a lot more regulations. And part of that will depend on how long it stays closed. But eventually the government will reopen and things will begin to get back to normal. Based on past trends, we expect more CFR text changes to come. We do expect the congressional disapprovals to move forward at some point. We expect agencies to continue issuing frequent minor changes or repeals in line with President Trump's 10 out, 1 in executive order. We expect agencies to continue with more enforcement discretion and postponement of effective dates, specifically looking at regulations that they believe could have a negative effect on business. And as more federal regulations change, we expect continued state-level activity. That could be states repealing state-level regulations that aligned with federal regulations that are repealed, or it can also be the creation of new state-level regulations to fill the gap left by regulations that were repealed by the federal government. So that concludes the information I have, highlighting some of the trends of quarter 3. And I'm going to toss this back over to Bob, and he's going to run through a poll.
All right. Thank you very much, Jennifer. As Jennifer said, I am going to launch a quick poll here then. Oops, I am on the wrong one. Sorry. Here we go. I have to take that one down. Apologies. And poll. All right, we're going to try that one more time. Okay, so you should see a poll on your screen right now. Jennifer talked about the proposed greenhouse gas reporting rollback. So the question is, if this was finalized, how would your organization likely respond? So just a single question here. Go ahead and just take a second to respond to that. And as you do, I'm going to switch back to my screen. Okay, I see responses coming in. We'll give everyone just one more minute. And then we'll share those responses with the group. Okay, that looks like probably everyone is in. I'm going to go ahead and end that poll and share those results. And it looks like we have a large group, a percentage of people who are exempt, who are not going to be impacted, but as a lot of people who are expecting to continue to collect data and kind of a mix of who's going to continue reporting, plan to report, and then of course people who, and no one said they're going to stop collecting data at all. So interesting. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pull that down now. Thank you. And we will move on here. So a quick reminder, I did mention that we'll be taking questions. I see a question or two has already come in. We'll be addressing those in a moment. You can still ask questions now, of course. I want to do a quick overview real quick of, before we get to questions though, on who Dakota is, a little bit about how we help companies to deal with some of these challenges. So for those of you on the call who might not be familiar with Dakota, we have been in the EHS space for 35 plus years now. We began with solutions for environmental auditing, helping organizations assess compliance for individual sites against current and applicable regulations. And while we have shifted to a more forward-looking approach, this concept of site-specific applicability is still a core tenet of our solutions. So how do we do this? Jennifer talked a little bit about our regulatory team. And so this regulatory content combined with software tools really is our distinction in the market, our secret sauce. Oops, there we go. And so this database, which is made up of plain language overviews, audit and inspection questions, compliance tasks, and other regulatory content. And then our clients then add their own local requirements, such as internal policies, permits, things like that, to create a centralized knowledge base of regulatory intelligence for their organization. And then, of course, we are a software company, so our solutions include a patented technology that intelligently maps only applicable requirements to facilities and locations. And then these unique compliance profiles can be used to track regulatory change and manage related activities. So our proactivity platform integrates this content into the software itself. So for those of you who are familiar with Dakota, you probably recognize brand names such as Profiler, Auditor, Tracer. Those are modules within the proactivity tools. And this is a solution that's really designed for, or ideal, I would say, for higher risk organizations, those with significant US footprints and or global operations. And it really provides hands-on control, connecting compliance tasks to all the individual underlying regulations, and then equipping clients with tools for managing those activities across the enterprise. We know that not every organization has a need for that level of control, though. We talk to companies all the time who are looking to get control around compliance management, but who don't maybe want to rely on third-party consultants. They don't want to put a drain on their internal resources, or they don't really have the time and energy to build out a complex infrastructure. So that's where Compliance Plus comes in. This is a new program that we're offering where our experts working with you use our applicability tools to build regulatory registers for each of your sites. That they'll then create recurring compliance tasks, inspection templates for you based on your obligations in the software ready to use. So a little bit more information about this program. Again, kind of no setup. That's the concept here is that we do the heavy lifting for you. The platform itself, easy to use, can be accessed from any type of device, so that tasks, inspections can be conducted on the go by your teams right away. It includes things like alerts, notifications, dashboards that provide built-in accountability and visibility right from day one. Most importantly, the goal is to centralize your compliance activities so that you have confidence that you are on top of all your regulations. So one final note, if you're simply looking for a way to stay on top of regulatory changes, Dakota offers at no cost a regulatory alert service, which covers federal proposed and action forcing changes. The alert emails, you see a sample of one on the screen here. They include the plain language overviews that our regulatory team develops as part of our software, as part of the regulatory database that feeds our tools. But these email alerts feature that information. They list the related citations, and they also have links out to the full text requirements should you want them. Um, Unlike the alerts that come from our proactivity products, these aren't connected to any site profiles, so you receive them for everything, regardless if they're applicable to you or not. But they are a good way to stay on top of changes as they occur. All right, so we will move on to questions and answers now. I just have a couple of URLs on the screen if anyone is interested in the regulatory alerts or learning more about Compliance Plus. And also, as we move on to questions, I'm going to conduct that exit poll now, which I accidentally launched earlier. And so let me go ahead and launch that. And as we respond to as we answer the questions, I'm just going to keep that on the screen, and we appreciate it if you can. Okay, and here we go. All right, that is not going to launch now, so we will just let that one go. So moving on to questions. I see a question that has to do with the software itself. How does Compliance Plus differ from proactivity? That's something that is, I mean, they're essentially different software platforms. One of them includes the regulatory database, and one of them we are leveraging. Compliance Plus isn't really a platform, it's really a program offering where our teams utilize our regulatory tools to build out compliance plans, and then they build the tasks in the Compliance Plus platform, or I'm sorry, in the software platform itself for you, so that you don't have to do the work. But they're different systems essentially. All right. Pause for not any other questions. All right. It looks like Jennifer's overview is so thorough that no one has any questions about any of those changes. So if there's nothing else, then I guess we'll go ahead and wrap it up. I'll thank everyone for taking the time out of their day to join us. We hope you found that information informative. And I invite anyone, if they have any questions at all, to reach out to us online. It's at the information you see on the screen, or just visit the website, and you can use to contact us to ask any questions. And if not, thank you again for coming, and have a great rest of your day.